Here's a number that should physically hurt you. The average Australian needs $1.6 million in superannuation to retire comfortably in a capital city. The average Australian's actual super balance? $200,000. That gap isn't a statistic. That's your life. 40 years of alarm clocks and performance reviews and being let go. And the finish line keeps moving. The retirement village wants $450,000 up front. The coastal towns cost $850,000 just to get in the door. And meanwhile, right now, there are towns in Tasmania, South Australia, and inland New South Wales where a 3-bedroom home costs less than a decent car. The air's clean, the hospitals exist, and the silence is the kind that actually heals something. We found 10 of them, and number 1 has a house price so obscene it's going to make you angry at every city you've ever paid rent in. Like, subscribe, and don't you dare click away.
Number 10. Bothwell, Tasmania. Population, 350. Average house price, $280,000. Vibe, a Scottish village that got confused and ended up in the Southern Hemisphere. Picture this. You're standing in the middle of the world's oldest golf course in the Southern Hemisphere, laid out in 1822 when most of this continent was still being mapped in pencil, and the only sound is wind moving through highland grass and a crow making its specific brand of existential commentary from a nearby fence post. There are no other golfers. There are barely any other humans. The nearest traffic jam is so far away it might as well be on a different planet. Welcome to Bothwell, Tasmania's Central Highlands, a town so deeply, authentically old that it sometimes feels like someone lifted a small Scottish village from 1850, teleported it to the banks of the Clyde River, yes, they named it the Clyde River, and then just left it there to age gracefully. Bothwell sits about 75 kilometers north of Hobart, which in Tasmanian distance means it's close enough to access real hospital infrastructure when you need it, but far enough that nobody from Hobart ever casually drifts through. The town has 29 heritage-listed buildings packed into an area about the size of a large suburban block. Walking its streets isn't nostalgia, it's archaeology. Convict-built sandstone walls that have been standing since before the American Civil War, a church that predates the concept of Australian Federation by decades. The real estate situation is, by mainland standards, genuinely surreal. Median house prices hover around $280,000. You can buy a 3-bedroom colonial cottage with a wood fire and more history baked into its walls than most museums for under $350,000. For that price in Sydney, you'd be lucky to secure a car space in Parramatta. Now, let's be honest about the trade-offs, because this channel doesn't do brochures. Bothwell has a population of roughly 350 people, which means the social scene is intimate in ways that can feel either wonderfully community-oriented or slightly suffocating depending on your personality type. The supermarket is not a supermarket. It is a general store with the inventory of a general store. The nearest Woolworths requires a commitment. Winter in the Central Highlands is legitimately cold, not Melbourne cold, where people act like 12 degrees is a survival situation, but actual, sustained, frost on the ground, fire in the hearth cold. But here's what the Reddit threads on R Australia and R Tasmania will tell you, and they're not wrong. People who move to Bothwell and stay past the first winter tend to stay forever. There's something about the scale of the silence here, the way the landscape absorbs you rather than demanding something from you, that does something genuinely therapeutic to the nervous system of someone who spent their career commuting. The golf course, by the way, still uses the original 1822 layout. You're playing the same holes as convict-era settlers. Try not to think about that too hard. Coming in at number 9, we're heading to the mainland, to a town built on copper, abandoned by history, and quietly refusing to accept that it's supposed to be finished.
Number 9. Burra, South Australia. Population, around 1,000. Median house price, $195,000. Vibe, a boom town that never got the memo that the boom ended. In 1845, they found copper in the South Australian Midlands so rich, so obscenely abundant, that it saved the entire colony of South Australia from financial collapse. Within a decade, Burra was one of the largest towns in Australia, 5,000 people, a functioning underground city where Cornish miners literally lived in the creek banks, and enough wealth flowing through it to make Melbourne jealous. Then the copper ran out. The miners left. The money evaporated. And Burra just stayed. Sat there in the mid-north of South Australia, 156 kilometers north of Adelaide, quietly maintaining its extraordinary collection of 19th-century stone architecture, and waiting, without any obvious urgency, for the right kind of people to notice it. Those people, increasingly, are retirees with taste and mathematical literacy. The numbers are almost offensive. Median house prices in Burra sit around $195,000 in 2026 in Australia, in a town with genuine heritage architecture, sealed roads, and an actual medical center. The Burra Hospital provides basic services, with Kapunda and Gawler offering more comprehensive care within reasonable distance, and Adelaide's world-class hospital infrastructure is 90 minutes down the highway. For Adelaide-based retirees in particular, Burra represents a kind of reverse escape, close enough to visit the family, far enough to stop being obligated to host them every Sunday. The town itself is a UNESCO aspirant heritage streetscape that somehow hasn't been turned into a boutique hotel precinct. The Burra Heritage Passport, yes, this is a real thing, gets you into 11 different historical sites with a single ticket, including the eerie, fascinating Monster Mine site, where you can peer into the open-cut pit that created all of this 180-year-old grandeur. The Bon Accord Museum Complex is genuinely one of the most underrated heritage experiences in regional Australia, and I say that without irony or tourism board funding. The social texture of Burra is what the Facebook community group Burra and Districts Community, which has more drama per capita than most reality television shows, would describe as close. Everyone knows everyone. This is either a feature or a bug, and only you know which one applies to you. There's a lovely bowling club, a pub that serves food and takes its role as social infrastructure seriously, and a community that hosts events with the enthusiasm of people who understand that in a small town, if you don't create the fun, there isn't any. The brutal truth: Burra's winters are cold and its summers are hot in that flat, relentless mid-north South Australia way. The wind has opinions. The flies during summer are committed to their work in a way that borders on professional. But the sunsets over the Midlands turn the sandstone buildings colors that don't exist on any standard paint chart. And on a clear winter night, the stars are so present above the dark landscape that first-timers from the city sometimes just stand in the street with their mouths open. At $195,000 for a home, you can afford to be slightly inconvenienced by weather. But if Burra's history feels almost too documented, too well preserved, wait until you hear about the town where Australian democracy itself was invented, and nobody seems to care.
Number 8. Tenterfield, New South Wales. Population, approximately 3,500. Median house price, about $330,000. The town that fathered a nation and then went back to sleep. Henry Parkes stood in Tenterfield in 1889 and gave the speech that led directly to Australian Federation. He called for the colonies to unite. He spoke of one Australia. He changed the course of history. Then everyone went home and Tenterfield went back to being a quiet highland town on the New England tablelands. And it has been quietly getting on with things ever since, almost as if it finds the whole birthplace of a nation label mildly embarrassing. This is the energy of Tenterfield. Understated, a little bit eccentric, entirely unbothered. At 800 meters above sea level in the northern tablelands of New South Wales, Tenterfield has the kind of climate that feels like a personal insult to coastal Queensland. Cool summers that actually require a light jacket, crisp winters with genuine frosts, and a mountain freshness to the air that makes you understand immediately why people talk about sleeping differently here. You actually sleep. deeply, like a person who has made peace with something. The real estate median sits around $330,000, which for a town of 3,500 people with this much infrastructure feels almost accusatory in how reasonable it is. Tenterfield has a hospital, a proper one. Tenterfield District Hospital provides 24-hour emergency care, a fact that matters enormously when you're making the retirement location calculation and you're realistic about what the coming decades might involve medically. The surrounding New England region has solid healthcare networks, and the Gold Coast, with its full suite of specialists and tertiary hospitals, is about 2.5 hours east. The town has a functioning commercial center with supermarkets, a Tenterfield brewery that takes itself seriously, a non-trivial quality-of-life factor, and a cultural calendar built around the annual Tenterfield Fleece and Fiber Festival, which sounds niche until you're there surrounded by enthusiastic artisans and realize you've accidentally had a wonderful afternoon. The Tenterfield Saddler, immortalized in that Peter Allen song, is still there, still operating, still making leather goods by hand in a shop that smells like history. The fact that you can buy a handmade leather belt in the actual shop Peter Allen sang about, in a town where you can also buy a house for $330,000, is the kind of compound value proposition that should be taught in retirement planning seminars. The train doesn't come here anymore. The highway does, connecting Tenterfield to Brisbane in the north and Sydney via New England to the south. It's genuinely regional. The isolation is real. The distances to major centers are real. But for the right retiree, the isolation is precisely the point. Tenterfield is the kind of town where you can know your neighbors, walk to a cafe, attend a community event, and feel like a human being with a place in the world, rather than a number in a city. Speaking of isolation, our next destination makes Tenterfield look like Darling Harbour.
Rather than a number in a city. Speaking of isolation, our next destination makes Tenterfield look like Darling Harbour.
Number 7. Strahan, Tasmania. Population, 700. Median house price, $310,000. Vibe, the edge of the world with a surprisingly decent bottle of Pinot Noir. Strahan is where the Gordon River meets Macquarie Harbour on Tasmania's wild west coast, surrounded by World Heritage wilderness so intact and so ancient that walking into it feels less like a nature experience and more like a philosophical vent. The rainforest here contains Huon pines that are 10,000 years old. There are trees in the Strahan hinterland that were alive when the pyramids were being planned. Think about that the next time you're stressed about something. The town itself is small, beautiful, and operating in a register that can only be described as deeply unbothered. It exists primarily as the gateway to the Wilderness World Heritage Area and the departure point for Gordon River cruises, which means it has genuine tourist infrastructure, good accommodation, solid cafes, a waterfront that would make a lifestyle magazine weep, without being overwhelmed by the crowds that descend on places like Port Arthur or Wineglass Bay. Healthcare is the honest caveat here. Strahan is 300 kilometres from Hobart and the nearest hospital with serious capability is in Queensland, with further services in Burnie. The Royal Flying Doctors Service covers remote Tasmania, but you'll want to go into this with eyes open. This is an option for the healthy and active retiree demographic, not someone who needs frequent specialist access. For those who qualify, the lifestyle return is staggering. Houseboats and fishing vessels, mornings where the harbour sits in silver fog, the sound of the Southern Ocean on the other side of the ranges. Internet connectivity has improved dramatically in recent years, meaning this is no longer the communications blackout it once was. You can video call your grandchildren from the edge of the known world. Median house prices around $310,000 for a property in a genuine Tasmanian fishing village with World Heritage wilderness on 3 sides. The maths continues to be compelling. If Strahan is the civilised edge, our next entry is where civilisation politely waves goodbye and keeps driving.
Number 6. Quorn, South Australia. Population, about 1,100. Median house price, about $185,000. Vibe,
a Flinders Ranges outpost that decided dust is a personality. Every great Western was filmed somewhere that looked like corn. The red quartzite ranges, the ancient geology, the light in the afternoon that turns everything amber and significant. Corn has stood in for the American West in Australian productions, and it is absolutely not offended by the comparison, because corn has the serene self-confidence of a place that has been here since 540 million years ago and finds human drama mildly amusing. Located in the southern Flinders Ranges, 40 kilometers north of Port Augusta, which is itself a genuine regional hub with hospital facilities, supermarkets, and the kind of infrastructure that makes remote adjacent living actually viable, Quorn offers median house prices that hover around $185,000. This is not a typo. In a town with heritage buildings, mountain backdrop, a famous steam railway, and direct access to one of Australia's most spectacular national park systems, the median house price is less than a decent car. The Peachy Reachy Railway, which runs steam and diesel trains through the stunning Peachy Reachy Pass, is Quorn's signature attraction and a genuinely magical piece of living industrial heritage. The cafe scene punches above its weight. Regional South Australia has quietly developed excellent food culture, and the Flinders Ranges access means that hiking, photography, and the kind of immersive nature experiences that cost thousands of dollars in ecotourism packages elsewhere are simply outside your door. Summer requires a genuine conversation with yourself about heat tolerance. Quorn in January is hot in a way that demands respect, shade, and a well-positioned ceiling fan. But the shoulder seasons in winter deliver clear skies, mild days, and the most extraordinary stargazing in the country. The Flinders Ranges sits within one of Australia's darkest sky regions. Now we're heading back east, to a town whose most famous resident is dead, buried in the cemetery and doing more for the local economy than most living citizens.
Number 5. Uralla, New South Wales. Population, 2,400. Median house price, around $320,000. Vibe, a New England Highlands town haunted, very productively, by a bushranger. Captain Thunderbolt, whose real name was Frederick Ward, but Captain Thunderbolt is obviously the correct choice, was the last bushranger shot in New South Wales. He was shot near Uralla in 1870. He is buried in the Uralla Cemetery. His grave is a tourist attraction. There is a statue. There is a festival. Uralla has turned the violent death of a 19th century outlaw into a cornerstone of municipal identity. And honestly, good for them. You work with what you have. But Thunderbolt aside, Uralla is a genuinely lovely New England Highlands town sitting at 990 metres above sea level between Tamworth and Armidale, which is almost aggressively good positioning for a retiree. Tamworth, 55 kilometres south, has solid hospital infrastructure and all major retail. Armidale, 24 kilometres north, is a university city with exceptional medical facilities, cultural programming, restaurants, and the kind of bookshop that makes you lose an afternoon. Uralla itself offers a charming commercial streetscape, a community feel that is warm without being suffocating, and median house prices around $320,000 for a region with this altitude, climate, and lifestyle quality. The New England tablelands climate is its own reward. 4 genuine seasons, crisp winters, cool summers that are the legitimate envy of coastal Queensland retirees sweating through their 37-degree Januaries. The community garden is well tended. The local pub is functioning. The Thunderbolt Festival brings people from across the region annually, which for a town of 2,400 is the equivalent of hosting the Olympics. Our top 4 are where things get genuinely special and genuinely weird, starting with a town perched on top of an ancient volcano.
Number 4. Stanley, Tasmania. Population around 470. Median house price around $420,000. Vibe, a fishing village that photobombed its own postcard. The Nut, a flat-topped volcanic plug rising 143 meters above Stanley's Harbour on Tasmania's northwest coast, is the most dramatic piece of real estate backdrop in regional Australia. It just sits there, vertical and improbable, behind a town of beautifully preserved historic cottages, while the Bass Strait does its moody, cinematic thing in front. Stanley is the kind of place that makes people who visit it immediately start researching house prices. This is not a coincidence. Yes, the prices here are the highest on this list, median around $420,000. But you are buying a postcard. You are buying a view that makes people audibly react when they see it for the first time. You are buying a town small enough that community is automatic, in a region, Tasmania's northwest, that is increasingly recognized as one of the state's most livable for exactly the combination of reasons this video keeps returning to: scale, beauty, affordability relative to the East Coast, and a pace of life that feels like a decision rather than an accident. The Stanley cable car takes you to the top of the nut. The walk is also available for those who consider lung capacity a hobby. From the summit, on a clear day, you can see King Island. The history here is thick. Stanley was the first base of the Van Diemen's Land Company, established in 1825, and the birthplace of 3 Tasmanian premiers. The honest trade-off: Stanley is genuinely remote in the Northwest Tasmania way, which is a specific grade of remoteness that even other Tasmanians acknowledge. Burnie, with its hospital and full retail infrastructure, is about 100 kilometers east. You are committing to a scenic drive when you need a specialist appointment. But the people who live in Stanley will tell you uniformly that this feels like a trade rather than a sacrifice. From volcanic drama to river serenity, our number 3 destination is where the Murray does something that could only be described as therapeutic.
Number 3. Mannum, South Australia. Population, 2,500. Median house price, $290,000. Vibe, a Murray River town that chose contentment and has absolutely no regrets. The Murray River at Mannum moves the way retirement should feel: steady, purposeful, unhurried, and carrying everything it needs within it. Mannum is 80 kilometers east of Adelaide on the Murray's banks, and it operates on a philosophy that is either deeply wise or radical, depending on where you're coming from. The philosophy that a good life can be lived at river pace, on a houseboat or a riverside block, with a pelican drifting past your morning coffee and absolutely nothing requiring urgency. The houseboat culture on the Murray around Mannum is genuine and active, not a tourist gimmick, but an actual residential lifestyle, with people living aboard permanently or seasonally and treating the river as their backyard, their highway, and their therapy combined. Renting is affordable. Buying river-adjacent property at the $290,000 median puts you into genuinely comfortable riverside South Australia. The Mannum Dock Museum of River History is world-class for what it is: the story of the Murray paddle steamer era, told with real artifacts in the actual docks where those vessels were built. The paddle steamer Marion, moored at Mannum, ran the Murray for decades and still does tourist cruises, because Mannum understands that its identity is its asset. Adelaide proximity is the quiet superpower here. 80 kilometers from one of Australia's most livable cities means Mannum residents access Adelaide's full healthcare ecosystem: the RAH, Flinders Medical Center, every specialist you could ever require, with a drive rather than a flight. For retirees making the healthcare calculation, this is not a small thing. This is the whole thing. The river floods. This is the sentence that needs to be said clearly and without softening. The Murray floods in wet years, and riverside property in Mannum is subject to that reality. Research individual property flood history and talk to locals before buying. With that caveat clearly understood, the lifestyle case for Mannum is extraordinary. 2 entries left. Our runner-up might just be Australia's best-kept retirement secret. And our number 1? Our number 1 is going to require a moment of open-mindedness.
Number 2. Glen Innes, New South Wales. Population, about 5,500. Median house price, about $310,000. Vibe, a highland city where someone built Celtic standing stones and the town just fully committed to the bit. Someone in Glen Innes, in 1992, decided that the town needed a circle of granite standing stones in the Celtic tradition, built on a hill overlooking the New England tablelands. The Australian standing stones, modeled on the Ring of Brodgar in Scotland, are now a legitimate landmark, visited by thousands annually, and the town has leaned into its Celtic heritage with a commitment that is either completely sincere or the most sustained long-term tourism prank in Australian history. Either way, it works. Glen Innes is at 1,075 meters above sea level. This is not a metaphor for anything. It is simply the altitude, and it explains the climate. Cool summers, cold winters, 4 sharp seasons, and air that makes your lungs feel like they've been serviced.
The surrounding New England Highlands are green and agricultural, full of cattle properties and heritage towns, and the kind of landscape that rewards slow living. But here's what makes Glen Innes the runner-up on this list, rather than a footnote. It is genuinely functional as a regional center. Glen Innes District Hospital provides 24-hour emergency services. The town has supermarkets, a cinema, a functional commercial center, a library, established community organizations, and a social infrastructure that punches well above its population weight. For retirees who want community without compromise, who want the small-town feel but not the small-town service vacuum, Glen Innes is the answer that the question was looking for. Median house prices at $310,000 feel almost inexplicable given the quality of the surrounding landscape. The sapphire-fossicking regions near Glen Innes are the largest in the southern hemisphere. You can legally go dig for gemstones in the paddocks around town. This is not a retirement activity. This is an obsession waiting to happen, and retirees with disposable time and low boredom tolerance will lose weeks happily to it. The winters hit hard. At over a kilometer above sea level, the frosts are genuine and the cold requires wardrobe investment. But the summers, green, mild, luminous, are the summers that coastal Australians pay enormous money to access at ski resorts, and Glen Innes just has them, as a baseline, for free. The Facebook group Glen Innes Community Notice Board is, according to anyone who spent time in it, exactly the right combination of useful and unhinged that tells you a community has real personality. People care enough to have opinions. That's a better sign than it sounds. And now, number 1. I warned you. I specifically told you at the beginning that you weren't ready. But here we are.
Number 1. Queenstown, Tasmania. Population, around 1,800. Median house price, $165,000. Vibe, the most psychedelically strange retirement decision available to any Australian in 2026. Queenstown does not look like Australia. It doesn't look like anywhere, really, except perhaps a fever dream where the mountains surrounding a small mining town were stripped of all vegetation by decades of sulfur smelting fumes and acid rain, turning the hills into bare flowing waves of raw rock in orange and green and purple and red, colors that have no business occurring in nature, but do relentlessly in every direction around this small city on Tasmania's west coast. The surrounding bare mountains are genuinely one of the most startling visual environments in the entire country. Hikers come specifically to walk terrain that looks like the set of a science fiction film about a planet that hasn't figured out photosynthesis yet. Some of the vegetation is slowly returning as the old smelter pollution clears. Some locals don't want it to because the bare mountains are Queenstown's identity. This is an ongoing, passionate local debate. Welcome to Queenstown. Now here is the number, $165,000 median house price. $165,000 in 2026 in Australia for a town with a functioning supermarket, a hospital, West Coast District Hospital, a swimming pool, a bowling alley, multiple pubs, functioning internet, and some of the most dramatic and singular landscape on a continent not exactly lacking for dramatic landscapes. Queenstown has been called dying for 30 years and has refused the characterisation with stubborn working-class Tasmanian determination. The copper mine, the mine that built this town, that poisoned those beautiful hills, that drove everything for over a century, has operated in various forms throughout, and the town has diversified into tourism and arts with real intent. The Gordon River Road connects it to Strahan on the coast. The Lyell Highway East takes you to Derwent Bridge and eventually Hobart. This is a 5-hour drive from Hobart, which needs to be said clearly. Healthcare access beyond the local hospital means genuine distance. The Royal Flying Doctor Service is part of the planning calculus here, not a backup option you never think about. Queenstown is for the adventurous, the genuinely independent, the people who have done the medical risk assessment with their GP and concluded that the freedom and the extraordinary surroundings are worth the trade. But here is what the people who live in Queenstown say on every forum and in every article and in every conversation with outsiders curious about why anyone would choose it. They found something here that they couldn't name but couldn't live without. A combination of community intensity,
In a small, somewhat isolated town, relationships become profound because they have to, and landscape that daily delivers the reminder that the world is old and strange and spectacular and larger than your anxiety about it. For $165,000, you can own a house in that feeling. The question is whether you're the kind of person who can live inside it. So, 10 towns, one country that most Australians drive past on the way to somewhere else. Here's the thing nobody tells you about retirement. It's not a financial calculation, it's an identity decision. You're not just choosing a house price, you're choosing what kind of life you believe you're allowed to have. And somewhere between the Sydney apartment you can't afford and the retirement village that smells of institutional carpet cleaner and quiet desperation, there's a version of Australian retirement that looks like Huon pine forests and Murray River mornings and Celtic standing stones in Highland light. The towns on this list are not perfect. They are cold or hot or remote or occasionally dramatic in the town Facebook notice board sense, but they are real and they are affordable and they are full of people who made a decision that everyone told them was too risky or too strange and who are now sleeping better than they have in decades. The secret Australia is not a secret because it doesn't exist. It's a secret because we've been told not to look for it. Go look for it. If this video changed how you think about where you could actually live, like it, share it with someone who's been doing the retirement math wrong, and subscribe because we're going into the 10 most affordable coastal towns in regional Australia next, and based on what we found, it might break your brain. Drop your pick in the comments. Which of these 10 would you actually move to? Queenstown stays on the table. Don't rule it out until you've seen those mountains in person.